You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we got the privilege of talking to Mr. Darrell Denton tonight. He is, as he professes, an old country boy from the state of Tennessee. So great to meet you, Daryl. I've been waiting for a long time to chat with you, and I've heard so many cool things about you. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Hey, I'm doing good here, and I certainly appreciate you having me on.
So we have a mutual friend, Mr. Martin Groves, which is just a great guy. One of my favorite episodes is when we talked about his adventures in the LBL, his encounters, and he's got those great books. And I know you're in one of the books as well, correct?
The second one, he was kind enough to put me in there, and the whole second chapter, the last half of the book, is about our encounter at the LBL in October of It was actually the October the 19th of 22, and the reason we were there was due to the fact that was the 30th year anniversary, the 29th anniversary of his actual encounter at the LBL. We were there again about a week ago, yesterday, at the same spot, and that was his actual 30th anniversary. And we were also there at night, and that was pretty intense. We've been there a couple times, but I've been real honored to be the only person that ever went there that I'm aware of. Martin states that he and I have been close friends and best friends for 42 years. We go back a ways.
Did you have any interesting things happen the last time you were there at the LBL just recently?
There was 4 of us there, and all my closest friends, which of course is Martin Groves and Mr. Ron Moorhead. His first time there with us. Real honored to have him, and of course Barton Nunley. He's normally always anywhere Martin goes, us 3 are together. And we didn't have anything happen at that particular spot. We were hoping to. Now, we had some very strange things happen not very far from there, but it was the cabin we stayed in that we haven't ever stayed in before. It was actually in the back part of a campground, and we had Bigfoot around us every night we were there, and just being mischievous, doing crazy things, breaking sticks and making noises and clacking rocks, and just a lot of things that Bigfoot's known to do. Matter of fact, Barton and I were out there 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out where they were coming from. So the second night we were there, because they were walking by our window in the cabin, you could see the big shadow of them. And I believe Barton actually got a picture of 2 of them. I did not get a picture of them, but we had a lot of, they were just being mischief. They weren't trying to harm us, but they would definitely watch us. We had a campfire going, and about 10 o'clock every night, they'd start up. It'd go on to about 4 in the morning. And of course, we go out a lot at night and research. We'll go out into the area I was mentioning a minute ago, and we'll do research there, then come back And usually we would get a cabin because it's a whole lot easier than bringing tents and that type of equipment. It's already set up. We'll go to our location and stay however long we want. Sometimes half the night. Got a good place to go back and sleep for a while, take a rest. But didn't have any action like we had in 2021. That was probably by far the strangest thing I've ever seen. It was so strange that I don't think I'll ever quite figure out that. And of course, Martin is the same way. It was just he and I there at that particular time. And we had pulled back in there. If I remember right, it was 12:48 at night. And we had pulled up, and it's a dirt gravel road that goes back in there. Now, if you've never been to the LBL, and I know some people watching may not know what the LBL is. It stands for Land Between the Lakes. And it's about 170,000 acres in Tennessee and Kentucky. And it's very remote. There's a north end and a south end. There's roads back in there when you go. If you don't know where you're going and know the location, you could easily get lost back in there. There's roads to the left and right. They're just about as far as you can drive back in there. When I say roads, there's a paved road leading in there, but when you get back into that remote area, it's mainly just dirt or gravel roads, off in different locations. And it's a strange place anyway. We've had a lot of stuff happen there over the years. Some of it strange, really strange, and had some real strange sightings there. But last year, October of 22 was when we seen the strangest thing I've ever seen. I've had a lot of encounters in my life, but nothing like that. It looked like a myth. It was off to the right. We were driving very slowly on this dirt road, headed back to the area that Martin had actually had his original encounter in 1990. And I looked over to the right. I had my window down, and he had his window down. And we're maybe going 3 miles an hour, just barely moving. And you really can't go very fast back on these roads, or you'll end up off a hollow or in a ditch. So I looked to the right, and there was like a mist. And the closer I got, I looked down, and there was just this huge creature laying right on the side of the road in a lot of brush and weeds on the edge of the road. And it was laying down in like a ditch, which after we went back, it was actually a creek bed next to a brook that went under the road there. And it was looking right at me, like just fixed on me. And I'm only probably 6-7 feet from this with my arm out the window. It just shocked me when I looked and turned that way to look at it. And when I looked at it, I thought, what in the world is that? And as soon as I looked over at Martin, I said, tell me you're seeing this. And he goes, oh, yeah, I see it. And I said, what in the world is that? And it was so strange. It had a head about half the size of our truck windshield, huge head. It had mane around its neck, like a lion. It looked like tiny flashlights for eyes. They were real clear and real deep. And it was a blue-silver color, grayish blue. And then it had, at the very tips of the hair on it, the very tips of all the hair on it had like light on the edges of them. And the strange thing about it was in a stance like a cat would pounce on something. And at the same time, as strange as it sounds, it was transparent. You could see through it. It was like something out of a cartoon or something. I've never seen anything like that. And I looked back at Martin and I said, stop, because I'm going to get out. And he said, no, he didn't say anything. He just kept going because frightened him a little bit too, because this thing looked like it was going to jump on us. But I wanted to get out and see what it was. But about that time, I called it, I don't think it's infrasound. I called it zapped. I've been zapped a couple times by the forest people or Bigfoot, but never by a Dogman. And all of a sudden, it filled the whole truck with this unbelievable smell. I can't smell good. I lost my smelling senses when I got COVID back in 2020. But Martin was so sick. And my legs were a little tingly, my arms, my upper chest felt pressure on it, and I had a massive headache all of a sudden. And I looked over at Martin, and he said, "Man, I can't breathe." And the effect it had on him, he said, my tongue and my throat have swelled together. "I can't breathe, Bub. I can't breathe." And I said, "Stop, pull over, let me drive." And about that time, this thing crosses behind us, and it didn't. Martin is looking in the mirror, and I'm looking back toward it, and it crosses behind us, behind the truck, and it just like glides across behind us. It's not like it ran, and it went into this field, then it went up this hillside, and you could hear this thing breaking branches and stuff as it was going up the hillside. It sounded like it was real heavy. And then I don't know where it went after that. We kept going. I was more worried about his health than anything. He was pretty much almost paralyzed. He couldn't breathe. I was thinking he was going to pass out, and we're way back in there in the middle of nowhere. And quite frankly, I don't know the roads nowhere near what he does. And I said, "Let me drive." And he says, "No, let me get us off this road." And we drove on out, and he fortunately was gasping for air, and I was feeling sick myself. And we got on out finally and turned to the left and drove a good ways, and we finally hit the main paved road that goes back in there, and turned to the right, and finally made it to a rest spot back there that has street lights under it. And I immediately went over to help him get out of the truck, and he said he could barely move at that time. And I said, "Are you going to be able to breathe?" And he was actually gasping for air. And he finally got a little better, at least where he could breathe. And we drove on to the main trace area and got under a ranger check station, and got him out where he could move around a little bit and walk a little bit. But he was better. He could breathe. But I believe he was sick about 7 days after that. He didn't get over it like I did. It was the strangest thing I've ever encountered. It sounds like something crazy, but if I hadn't seen it myself, I probably wouldn't believe it. But something like that doesn't seem to even be possible. But Martin seems to think it must have come out of a portal or something. I don't know where it came from, but it was in the ditch, but it had like a mist around it at first. It was very strange. All I could call it was some kind of translutional, huge dog creature is what I would call it. But like I said, strangest thing I've ever seen, and he would tell you the same thing today if he's right here. And that account is in his book, which is Beast Between the Rivers, the second book. He has 2 of them. And
they're both fantastic. Looking back at the creature, when you saw it cross the road, how tall would you say that it was when you were looking back at it?
It's dark out there. And when I say dark, you can't see your hand in front of your face if you're out of the vehicle. By just what I could see of it, I don't know the height of it, but it was visible over the bed of the truck. I've never been asked that question. I've never thought about it, but it wasn't any crazy height, like 10 foot or anything. I'm guessing probably 6 to 8 foot off the ground, probably. But it was visible to see. He could see it better than I could. I was gasping for air and looking right in his rearview mirror. And I could hear it. It was the footsteps it was making. It went into a grass field, a real high grass. And then there's a bank that goes up real steep right there. And it went up that bank, and that's when you could really hear it, when it was breaking limbs and sticks as it was going up the side of that bank. It sounded like something very heavy. It sounds like it was a long time to view it, but it really wasn't a long time. I don't know what the time frame was of actually seeing it and everything. I'd say maybe 5 to 10 seconds at the most. I wouldn't think that long. Wow. But it definitely seen me, and it looked at me in the most evil way. It's just hard to explain, but I think the thing that I've seen a dog man before, but it was nothing like that. The one I seen looked more flesh and blood. This thing was like something that was. It's almost like cartoonish. Like I said, it's so strange looking. So
it's very. The description is very sci-fi, very alien. It's very weird.
Yeah, I've never seen anything close to that, and neither has Martin. He and I've talked about it so many times, and like I said, as crazy as it sounds, we've been back there numerous times hoping to see it again, and we've never seen it again or anything close to it. Matter of fact, I've never seen any other creature there, but just regular game, but deer and other things. But
we'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
Besides that moment in October, I believe it was October 19th of 22 is when we seen that. But
there's so many weird things that happen in the LBL. There's Dogman, there's Bigfoot, there's whatever you guys just saw right there. Do you have you ever thought, why is it in this one place there's so many weird things happening?
Barton Nunley, Martin and I, Joe and Jesse of Hellbent Holler, they're good friends of mine and ours too, and they go there, and just the best boots on the ground team ever, and just fearless. They go out and just walk those hills in the middle of the night, and we do that too, but not as much as they do. And we've talked about that. I think it goes back to maybe even before that area was well known. I think I'm correct, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the Indians, the American Indian in that area had talked about a creature they called it a dog type creature. The settlers there in that time had animals attacked and even people attacked by some type of dog type creature. And I think it was in the 60s when they formed the actual waters of the Cumberland River in Tennessee that turns into Lake Barkley after you get past Cheatham Dam. And Barkley and the Tennessee River I think those are the two rivers that it turns into Kentucky Lakes, what it turns into. And a large portion of it is in Tennessee and Kentucky. But when they flooded that area, there were people that refused to leave that area.
Wow.
The TVA came in there, and these people had lived there their families had lived there for, some of them, for hundreds of years. And a lot of those people refused to leave, and they just flooded. There's so many graveyards in there. I think I'm correct. There's over 200 graveyards in the LBL. And we found stones in the late 1700s. Some you can't even tell what they are. It's just a stone. And there's a lot of those graveyards that were covered by water, too, because this is a large lake. It's just a massive body of water. And I think there's just some type of phenomena that's always been there. I don't know what makes it that type place, but when you drive into LBL, you get a strange feeling just driving in. So it's just an area that I can't explain. You hear people that go up there and spend a weekend and never have an occurrence, or stay in a camping area and they fish and camp with their family. And then you hear other people that go up there and leave and won't ever come back. They see something, or they're getting scared off by something. And we've been there so many times, and most of the time it's just me, our team, me and Barton Unley and Martin Groves. And Martin and I have been up there, just us two, plenty of times, but mostly it's just us three. And Ron came with us this time, and he had a good time. He wished he could have stayed longer, and we're going back again. He's already said he would love to go back again and stay with us. And I wish he could have seen more, because our main goal was hopefully for him to see some type of creature, because he's never seen a dog man, and a lot of people haven't. We go back 30 years ago, roughly, when Martin and I used to conversate about our experiences. Back in that day, I was a commissioner and an alderman and then a mayor for quite a few years in the same area, that Martin Groves was the deputy sheriff, and he was a chief deputy. He was up there next to the sheriff and well respected. And he and I had my experience, my first one in 90 of a Bigfoot that just scared me to death. I didn't even know they existed. If they did, not in Tennessee. And then he had his experience a year later, and you couldn't tell anybody. Back in the 90s, if you told people, hey, I've seen a Bigfoot or I've seen a Dogman, of course, they'd have thought we'd lost our mind. And now it's a lot easier to speak of it. And Martin held that he held that. And I pretty much did too for nearly 25 years before I started speaking of it. I told members of my family and very few people, but being an elected official, you don't run around the county and town telling people you've seen a Bigfoot and it scares you to death. And he was afraid he would have gotten fired. So for telling me he almost got killed or eaten by a dogman. Thank goodness for podcasters like yourself who have good quality shows that you can talk about this type of stuff. But that wasn't available when this happened to us, and there weren't any Facebook groups. I think Michael Patterson, I think he started the first group, and I believe it was 2015, and I was helping him and with him for a long time there. And that was Blue Ridge Sasquatch and Crypto. And Michael's not Mike Patterson, but Michael Patterson. He still has that group. He's still a close friend of mine. I left that and started my own in late February of 2022. But there was maybe 3 groups on Facebook when we started that.
That's wild.
There wasn't any Bigfoot or Dogman groups, and I quite frankly never even heard of a Dogman until Martin Groves told me about one. And then I didn't hear anything much about it until the last 4 or 5 years. You hear a lot about it.
It seems to be added definitely the last few years. A lot of people have gotten interested into that creature, I would say. You take me back to the first time that you had an encounter with a Bigfoot, what that situation was like for you.
Well, that was my grandfather had a large farm in Cannon County, Tennessee, Woodbury, Tennessee, and it was very remote out there. My grandfather lived in that area all of his life, and I pretty much grew up on that farm. My grandparents stayed with those grandparents quite often and did everything kids do. My grandfather was a farmer, and he was pretty strict on me being in the field helping him when I was 5 years old. We were either in a garden or a tobacco field, or I was helping him with hay in the field because he had animals and livestock. I knew that area very well. I don't know how many acres my grandfather had, but he had a pretty good sized farm, and certain areas were fenced off for the cows he had. And I'd hunted there for as long as I can remember, and camped in the woods by myself when I was 11, 12 years old. Me and my dog, and we'd camp in the woods and we'd hunt just regular game, and wasn't scared of anything, and never seen anything that I didn't know what it was. And this was, I believe it was November the 6th of 92. Me and 3 of my friends, Scott, Jason, and Cody, would go up to my grandfather's farm on the opening day of black powder season, which is muzzleloader, that we call it in Tennessee. It's a rifle that you can only fire one shot. It's like the old ramrod. You pack your bullet in it with a wad and a firing cap. And opening season is before gun season, and your chances for a bigger deer a lot of times are that week. And we've been going up there 5 or 6 years, me and those 3 guys. And I had a camper, a nice camper back then. I pulled my truck, and I would pull the camper up, open a gate, and pull it next to my grandfather's barn, and we would set the camper up there. And they followed me with a truck and a trailer, and we all had ATVs or 4-wheelers back then, all 4 of us. And we would go up there, and we would get there a day or two before the season opened, and we had some stands built out in those woods, and then we had also a carrying stand, which you carry on your back and put around a tree and climbing stand. And we had got there that Sunday, which would have, I could be off a day or two on the date, but I'm pretty sure it was November 5th of 92 when we got there. And my granddad, of course, at that time, he was, I believe, 90 years old, might have been 92, but he was in tremendous shape. You would never think he was that old. He still farmed and did everything farmers do. He even had cows he milked every morning. And he come out and greeted us, and we hung out with him a little bit. And we set camp up, and I went in and talked to him, and I was standing on his back porch. He had an old wood farmhouse on a hill, and I said, Granddad, this year I'm going after a trophy deer. I'm not really looking for one for the meat, and I probably won't kill one unless I see a trophy. And I said, where do you think the best place would go to get a trophy deer would be? And I was standing on his back porch. He pointed out, he said, you see that third hollow over there in the hill? And I said, yeah. He said, that's probably where I'd go. And this was a good walk from his house. You're looking over the hills, and this place is hills and hollows, just one after another. And it's pretty hard to even explain how much steep hills there are there. They're 45-degree angle, so it's a climb. He said I would go over there. Of course, I did. I headed off his back porch, and I went back behind his porch, and I had my climbing stand on my back, went back to the camp to get it, and I headed where he showed me to go. And I went over that way, and you go through his yard, through it down to a gate, and you open the gate up. It's just a standard-sized gate, and it goes into the field that was fenced where his cattle were. And I went down there and went through that gate and crossed about it's probably 200-yard wide. At that time of the year, it was like a sagebrush field. And I walked down through that till I got to a fence line. It was a barbed wire fence. And I climbed that barbed wire fence and got over and started climbing this hill. And it was, like I said, it was a steep hill. And walked up to the top of that hill, went over another hill, and by the time I got to the third hill, it was going down. It was real steep, and he said, when you get over there, you'll know you're in the right spot. There's an old part of an old grist mill there to the left, and the old house that I was born in is still there, but it's fallen in. You'll see the remnants of tin roof and part of the chimney standing. And he said, you've been there, but it had been years since I'd been there. We had went by gravel roads back in there to get there. But anyway, I got over there to that spot and had my stand on my back, and I walked around the side of this bank, the side of this hill. And like I said, it was real steep, like a 45-degree angle. And I seen a tree that was straight up, kind of overlooking the creek in front. And I went and put my stand around that tree and got it ready for the next day, climbed up in it and sat back and cut a few limbs off with a little foldable saw I had, so I'd be able to set my stuff up in the morning. And then I come down and walked across that creek, and there was a large cane thicket to my left. Cane is it looks like cane. It is cane. It grows 10 or 15 foot tall all down creek and riverbanks in Tennessee. And it went all the way down the left side of that creek bank and crossed over and walked down through the creek. And this creek's only probably 10, 12 foot wide right there, but it's about 2 foot of water that runs all year round. And it gets a lot wider on down from there, probably 50 or 60 yards wide. And I went up, there was a little clearing there, and I just was mainly looking for deer signs. And I found a scrape. It's what a buck deer does, a male deer with their antlers. They'll rub on trees and leave a mark when they're in the area. Found a couple of those, and I could see the deer had been out. There was a little game trail on top of that, right next to the creek bank on both sides. And where deer and stuff travel on it. And I seen a lot of tracks. And I walked over a little bit to the right on the edge of that bank, right next to the game trail, and there was a big tree limb sticking out, an oak tree. And there was a limb up pretty good, and I'm 6'5", so I jumped up and grabbed the limb, and I had put a what's called a drag rag on your boot when you go in, and this elastic thing that goes on your boot, and you put a scent on it, and it covers the human scent as you go in. And pulled that off, and I grabbed that branch and tied it around the end and let it go, and it was up off the ground probably about 8 foot. And that kind of lets the scent go down that hollow, and sometimes it'll bring deer in because they're trying to, it smells like a female deer in estrus or that time of year when they go into that, and which causes the bucks to chase them. And I hung into that tree and let it go and come back across the creek and went through a little ravine to my left and climbed those hills again and came back and went down to the camper and hung out with my friends that night, and we grilled out and had a good time. And I went up and told my granddad, I said, hey, when you get up in the morning, would you come down and wake me up?
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
And because it's a pretty good walk over there, I think it took me about 45 minutes to an hour that day just to get there. And he said, sure. So I'll do that for you. My granddad never called me by my name. He's called me boy all my life. And he said, I'll be down there, boy. He said, I get up about 4:30. I said, that's fine. But we all got in the camper that night and went to sleep. And about 4:30 or 4:45, he banged on the side of the camper and he said, boy, time to get up. And I got up and went out and spoke to him, and he was going to the barn there in front of us to milk a cow. And I headed that way. When I went down behind his house there and went through the gate and went through that field, and had a flashlight with me. I had what was called a fanny pack that I carried my extra powder load and extra firing caps and a powder horn in it, and a few other things I had with me in that also. And I went on down and I got to the barbed wire fence there after going about 200 yards through that field there, climbed over the fence and started climbing the hill. And I got just a little ways up on the hill. I don't think I was halfway up, but I was a pretty good ways up, and it's dark, and I didn't know that area that well because I didn't normally go into that area. But I got about probably close to halfway up, and I heard something walking to the left of me, and I stopped, and I thought, that's strange. Why would somebody be in here? I knew my 3 friends. I knew where they were hunting. They were hunting in pretty close to the same area that they hunt every year. And they were a good ways from me, way off in a different direction, in different hollows. They would hunt a different hollow. One would hunt one and one would hunt another. And so I knew it wasn't them. And I started shining the light and I didn't see anything. But I heard it walking. It sounded like a person walking. It startled me a little bit. I thought, somebody's in here hunting. And then I started thinking, maybe it's a cow or a horse that's got in here. So I just climbed over the hill, and when I got over to the second hill, I was hurried because I was startled still in my mind about what that was walking. And by the time I got to there's a little barbed wire fence in the bottom hollow of the second hill that was old and it was rusty. You could step over most of it. Had been used in years. But by the time I got to the top of the third hill, the last hill, I started climbing down that hill, and I heard it again. But this time it was up on the top of the hill I just came down to my left, and it was walking. I would stop, and it would stop. And then I would walk a little further down, and you could hear anything walking, these dead leaves. There was a crunch sound. And I thought, somebody's in here hunting. And I couldn't imagine anybody hunting on my grandfather's farm. First of all, he wouldn't allow them if we were there. And I went on down and I found the creek with my flashlight, and I walked around the edge of the bank until I found the tree that I'd put my stand around the day before. And I pretty hurriedly got into it. I put my feet in the straps and I leaned back and started climbing the tree. And I climbed on up, and that takes probably 15 minutes to get up there with a climbing stand. I was up about 25 feet off the ground. That's about what I normally like to hunt. And I've got a real good view, but it's still dark. And I got up and I leaned back. When you lean back, it makes the frame of that stick into the tree real good where it won't slip. And I had a safety strap I put on and put on the limb behind me around it in case the stand fell, I wouldn't fall with it. And got my stuff hung up on those branches up there. I hung my pack on the right and my lunch, and I hung a pair of binoculars to the left. And I leaned back and got set up. This stand had a little camo cover that you pull this bar down in front of it that goes around you, and it covers you from right below your neck all the way down to your feet. It covers you real well. It looks like you can't see a person in it. And I always wore blackout under my eyes when I hunt because the sun glare. If it's sun shines, it'll make your face sparkle. A lot of times the deer will spot that. And I'm set up. It's still dark. I'm thinking, what was that I heard? And I didn't hear it anymore. I heard it go down to the left of me on top of the hill down toward that cane thicket. And it stopped. I didn't hear it anymore. I sat there a good while. I don't know quite how long. It was over an hour. And it started getting a little light. I didn't hear any sounds in the woods. It was unusually quiet. There was no sounds at all. And then about daylight, when I could really start to see across the creek in that clearing, it was a real foggy morning, and the creek had fog on it, and I couldn't see across it to the clearing. And I started hearing regular animals then that you hear in the woods, squirrels and birds and everything else. And as daylight was starting to come up and the sun was setting, and it was somewhere around 7:45 or so. The fog had cleared a little across the creek, and I could see the clearing on that side then. And to the left of me, I seen a deer come out somewhere around that cane area. And it was a female deer, a doe. It came out over there and it crossed through the creek. It went up the other side of the bank and went on that game trail and walked down the side of that creek bank. And I'm up high enough, I'm almost looking over on it in this tree, the creek, by the angle I was. And then two more came out, and they were smaller ones following this one. And I watched these deer play over there. They were just walking around. There was two younger ones, probably yearlings from that large doe, and they were just walking around. It was a real good year for acorns, and they were eating acorns and milling around, kicking the leaves like deer do, trying to find food in the morning. And I watched them walk around over there for a good bit. They'd never seen me, and I was real still and quiet. And I had my gun propped right against that bar in front of me. And I was feeling pretty excited. I'd seen 3 deer. And normally when you see doe that time of year, there's going to be a buck somewhere close by, which is the male deer. And I watched them for a good while. And it was a little after 8. I don't remember. The only reason I remember this time because back in that day I wore one of these old Iron Man watches, if you remember those things. And I had what was called indigo on them. You could push a button and it would light the glow up on it. And I would use that to go in the woods before that light. And it lit up pretty good, but it also had a little stopwatch on it. I would always push that little stopwatch button when I seen a deer come out. That way I would have a relative of time of what time to be there the next time, because they normally follow a pattern. And I'd push that button that morning, and I believe it was 8:15 or right at that when I pushed it. And then when I didn't see another deer, I'd push it and I'd have a time frame. But I watched these deer play, and they walked down, and they never noticed me. They were just, the 2 little ones were to the right and left of the bigger deer, and they were all eating, and they were facing to my left, looking straight ahead. And all of a sudden they turned to the left a little bit, and the lead deer, the larger female, just all of a sudden just froze. All 3 of them were looking toward this cane thicket. And I'm thinking, here's a buck deer about to come out. That's what they're looking at. And the lead deer was just frozen, her ears sticking straight up, looking right toward that cane area. And I looked at the other two deer. They were doing the same thing. They were not even moving. And then the lead deer took her right front foot and raised it about 3 times like she was trying to get something to move, and she would hit the ground with her front hoof. And I thought, here comes a buck. You better get ready here because one's about to come out. And then all of a sudden, she raised her nose like she was smelling, and she makes this real loud blowing noise. And it almost sounds like somebody sneezing real loud, but it's a lot louder than a sneeze. She makes that real loud sound, and then she goes right back to that frozen moment, just staring right in that area. And my anticipation is, here comes a big buck out of this, somewhere over here next to this cane thicket. And then all of a sudden, she turns to the right and takes off just running as fast as she can. She runs right by the front of me on this game trail, running as fast as she can. The other two deer followed her, and I watched them till they ran out of sight. And I thought, well, that's strange. Normally a deer doesn't do that with a buck coming. Something that's normally like when you spook them or somebody scared them or shot at them. And I deer hunted all my life. I was real familiar with what deer would do. And I watched them go out of sight, and it got real quiet. And I'm anticipating a big buck coming out over there somewhere. And I remember reaching down to my rifle, my muzzle loader, and I pull the hammer back on it. It makes a click. I did it real quietly where I'd be ready if it stepped out. And I waited a few minutes, nothing happened, and a few more minutes, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden I see the cane, it's moving. And this cane is so thick that I couldn't walk through it. It's just right next to each other, large, thick cane. And somewhere over in the middle of it, the cane was moving. It's 12 or 15 foot tall, and you can see it swaying from the back edge to the front. And I'm thinking, man, this must be a massive deer because to move that cane like that. And I watched it move all the way to the front, somewhere down to the front of it till it stopped, and then it stopped moving. And I'm ready thinking, this is a record whitetail because I couldn't imagine anything pushing that cane around like that. And then out steps this creature. And I still, right now, every time I tell this story, it was definitely a life-changing experience. It was, when I seen this thing step out, I kept looking. I thought, am I really seeing this? And it was just a tall, big black creature. And it stepped out. It took one step and just leaped completely across to the other side of the creek and landed on that game trail on the other side. And I'm in just, what is this? It was just a terrifying moment. I was literally scared to death. I never seen anything like this and didn't even know this. I didn't know there was anything like that in these woods. I'd never seen anything. And it walks right on the game trail, right across, almost dead in front of me. I'm looking down on it in this tree at an angle, and it walks right down the game trail. It stops and turns and looks right at me. This thing knew exactly where I was at. It knew I was in the tree. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is this? I could barely breathe. I don't scare easy. I've never gotten scared since like that. And this thing just looks at me. It shows me its teeth. It just like grits its teeth, shows me its teeth, looking like it's really mad. And it was the ugliest, meanest looking thing I've ever seen. And it just stared at me for a minute. And then it walks over to that limb that wasn't very far from where it was standing, where I had that drag rag hanging in there. And it reaches up, it pulls it down, and its head was about the same height as that. So I'm thinking it's real close to 8 foot or a little more. And it reaches down, smells that rag, and then it just pulls that limb, rips the whole limb off the tree. And This tree limb was not a massive limb. It was probably 3 or 4 inches at the very base where it went into the tree. I'm thinking, what has that kind of power to rip that limb out of the tree? And by this time, I could barely breathe. I'm serious. I was thinking, what do I do? Do I shoot this thing? Is it going to come across the creek and just pull me out of the tree? It was just I had so many thoughts running through my mind. I remember just sitting there, just sweating, thinking, what do I do here? And then it walks right back to the same spot it was at. It looks at me again like it's really mad. It did not like me being there. And it lets out a growl, a real low, long growl. And I've still never heard a growl like that. And I thought, this is it. This thing's coming across the creek. It's going to pull me out of this tree and it's going to just kill me. So I didn't know what to do. And I've got my hand on my gun. I thought, do I fire and shoot this thing? And I said, no, I don't think one bullet will kill this thing. And I don't have time to reload. And I just sat there just frozen, was just scared to death, trying to get my breath. And then it looks at me and then it lets out this yell that I've never heard before. And just an unbelievable scream-like yell.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
That echoed all down through that hollow, and it's just a terrifying yell. I've never heard anything like that since. I've heard Bigfoot yell, but not like that. This thing was really mad I was there. And I thought, well, this freak. And I was ready to just pick my gun up. I was thinking, should I just jump and run or should I fire? And it stares at me for a few more seconds, and then it turns and it walks straight behind where it's standing. And it continues to walk, and it turns and looks at me one more time with a really mad, evil look. And I watched it walk on through the hardwoods till it was out of sight. And I was in such a panic. I thought, well, I don't have 15 minutes to get out of this tree climbing back down. Or I just lowered the bar in front of it. I jumped out of the top of the tree stand. And I landed, it was such a steep embankment. When I landed on the leaves, I had my gun above my head, and I slid all the way down this bank into the creek. And I jumped up out of the creek, and I looked back to see if it was there, and I didn't see it. And I run up out of the creek, and I run up that hill. There was a little ravine to my right there that was a little narrow spot that I went up, and it wasn't quite as steep. And I'm running as fast as I can run. I left everything, just ran with my gun, and I climbed over that first hill, and I kept looking back, and I didn't see it. I got over the first hill, and I was running as fast as I could down the second one, and got down the second one, and jumped that little small barbed wire fence, and went up. I was going up the other side of the second hill, and I looked back, and there it was on top of the hill, standing up there next to a tree, just watching me. Now, I don't know if it was the same one or another one, but it was one of them standing up there looking at me. And that just gave me more adrenaline when I seen that thing. So I just kept running as fast as I could. I remember thinking, well, it's going to get me before I get to the top of the hill. And I kept running. I got over the top of that hill, and I was headed down the bottom of the last hill. And the barbed wire fence that I'd climbed over that morning is probably about 7 foot tall. And I said, I'm not climbing, I'm jumping it. And I jumped it. I cleared it, but the bottom of my left pants leg caught the barbed wire and ripped it all the way up past my knee and cut a huge gash on the side of my leg. I didn't even know it was cut at that time. And I've cleared that. I'm running through this sage field between the fence line and my grandfather's back gate. And it's about 200 yards wide, and I'm looking back the whole time thinking this thing's coming. And I get to the gate, I open the gate real quick, shut it real quick, looked and didn't see it. And I ran into his backyard, and I went up on his porch, his old wood back porch, had an overhang on it, and went through the back door and shut the back door, locked it, and looked out the glass. I didn't see it. And I went into the right, which went through his kitchen into his sitting area, and had this big, huge potbelly stove that was between the corner of his living room and the floor and his sitting area. I went over and just sat down in the corner and on the floor, and I was just completely out of breath. And my grandfather was saying, "Boy, what's wrong with you?" And I couldn't even speak. I was so out of breath. And I got up real quick and went and looked out the window in the back door again, and I didn't see it. And came back and sat back down. He said, "Boy, what's wrong with you?" And I said, I finally got my breath, and I said, "I seen a monster in the woods." He said, "A monster?" And I said, "Yeah, I've never seen anything like that." He said, "What did it look like?" And I said, "It was this huge creature, it was black, and it was the meanest looking thing I've ever seen." And he said, "Oh, you seen a wood booger?" And I was in shock. I said, I'd lived on this farm with my granddad a lot. I stayed there with my grandparents. My mom and dad worked in Nashville, which was about 92 miles away. And I stayed there till we moved to our home in the other side of Nashville. And I stayed there every summer with him and helped him in the field when I wasn't in school. I was in shock. I said, "What is a wood booger?" He goes, "Oh, they live around here." And I said, "I've been with you all these years, Granddad. You've never mentioned anything about a wood booger." He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "I've seen 4 in my lifetime." He said, "They don't bother you. They're real territorial." He said, "I should have thought, being over in that area, there was probably going to be one of them too, because nobody goes back in there." And I said, "Well, you never told me about one of them. And if you had, I would have never went in there." And he said, "That's why I didn't tell you." He said, "You've hunted in these woods all your life, and your cousins have slept in the barn loft." And he said, "I didn't want to scare you about them because they don't harm you." And I said, "This thing wanted to kill me." And he said, "It didn't." And he said, "Ain't nothing to worry about, boy. It'll be okay." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm not going back there again." And he said, "I've been in the field and I'll be working. I'll look up and when I'm standing there next to the fence row watching me work." And I said, "You had these things that close?" He said, "Oh, I've seen 4 of them and I've heard a lot, hear them yelling." And I said, "How did I miss out on this? Because I've been here so often. I've never heard one that I know of." And he wasn't real nervous about them. And I was still just scared to death. And he said, "Boy, you look like you've seen a ghost." And I said, "I feel like I did see a ghost." And it was just terrified me. And I got up several other times and looked out the window to see if it was coming. I never seen it again. And I sat there for a couple hours and just scared to death. And my granddad was trying to calm me down. He said, "Them things," my granddad had a big chicken house out to the left of his back porch, and it was made out of log. Him and his family had made it years before then, and it had a door on it, and he had a lot of chickens. He goes, "In the wintertime, they'll come up here and they'll take a couple of them. They get hungry, can't find any food, and they'll take a couple chickens and they'll leave a little pile of rocks and sticks like they're paying for it." And I'm just sitting there amazed. Me and my granddad were very close, and I'd never heard of one or seen one. And he said, "You remember your grandma used to tell you, don't y'all stay out after dark here. Y'all get in the house because the booger man will get you." And I said, "That was the booger man?" He said, "Yep." And I'm still just flipped out, nervous wreck. And a couple of hours later, my friends come back, and one of them had killed a big deer, and they were down at the camper. And I walked down to see them, and I said, "Hey, guys, we've been coming up here a long time. Have you ever seen anything in the woods?" And they looked at me like, "What are you talking about, Big D?" And I said, "They were skinning a deer out there hanging in a tree. Only one of them had killed one." And I said, "Something maybe like a Bigfoot or something." And they started laughing. They looked at me and said, "You had too much to drink last night." And I said, "No, I didn't drink anything." And I didn't say anything else about it. I could tell they thought I was crazy. So went on back to my grandfather's house, and I didn't stay another night in the camper. I stayed in the house of my granddad, slept in the bedroom in there, and they stayed in the camper, and they were concerned about me. They kept asking me. I'd go out there and stay with them till they went to bed, and they couldn't understand why I wasn't staying in the camper, but I was staying there with him. And I stayed there we stayed there a week, and I was in there the rest of the week with him at night and couldn't sleep. Just thinking this thing was coming, looking in the window or something. It was like some type of fear I've never had. And it really messed me up for a while. I never thought if these things existed, I thought they were out in California or Oregon or Washington or British Columbia. I didn't think they were in Tennessee, but they were. And we went up there a couple of years after that, and I didn't hunt. I told my buddies, we'll go up there. I didn't tell them I wasn't going to hunt till we got there. Y'all go ahead and hunt. I'm going to hang out with my granddad. He's getting older. And he was, and I did want to spend time with him, but I didn't care to hunt. I didn't I didn't go in the woods for about 7 years. What deer hunting I did do was with friends on a farm, at my farm or somebody else's. I'd pull up in my truck and sit there out toward the woods and didn't get out of the truck. I just watched the wood line, but it messed it. It was definitely life-changing. I've never had that kind of fear before since. I think now looking back on it, if it wanted to kill me, it could have. And I realized that over time, it didn't want to kill me. It just wanted to run me out of its area. I probably messed up its deer hunt. That was my first encounter.
Daryl, that's incredible. Do you mind sharing what county in Tennessee that was in?
That's Cannon County, Tennessee.
Cannon County? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything in like a drawing of it or an illustration that looked similar to what you saw that day?
I actually, after I got home, I started going to the library because there wasn't a cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone then or internet or anything. I'm still not very good with technology, but I actually went to several libraries back home trying to find pictures of Bigfoot. And I actually did find one that looked like it. And strangely, there was a book with 10 pictures of Bigfoot in it. It said the 10 different type. And the number 2 one on the book was called the wood booger, and it looked identical to this thing, except it didn't have red eyes. The one in the picture had red eyes. The one I seen didn't have red eyes. It just had dark eyes. And it was dark eyes in the middle with some yellowish white around them, it wasn't red. But everything else looked like the picture. It was pretty terrifying when I seen it. I thought, oh gosh, there it is right there. And,
wow, that's incredible, man. And the great thing about like the listeners that I have is someone will comment within an hour after this is posted and say, oh, it's this book and it's on this page.
Yeah, they probably know it. And I've actually looked it up. I've actually got a picture of it. I say over the years, I don't have the fear I had of it then, but it's definitely a life-changing moment when you see one of those things. And this wasn't a friendly-looking one. If it had been a friendly-looking one or didn't act irritated or mad, I might have taken it a little better. But this thing had an intention of really being mad at me. I could tell by its expression and the way it looked at me. Its mouth was to the right, kind of contortioned, like it was just ready to kill me. It was really mad that I was there. And like I said, I didn't hunt for years. Didn't go in the woods. I had nightmares for weeks. Didn't sleep. This went on for a long time, and I still had nightmares about it. The only thing that saved me from that was I've been very fortunate. I don't understand how it works because I've got friends that's been in the woods for years and years hunting. Even older friends that's been in there 50 years deer hunting and all type of game hunting. And I coon hunted that area, not that far in, but not far from it when I was a kid with my uncles. And never heard of a wood booger. And I never heard one of them mention it. They grew up there. But I think that some people, for some reason, find these things find you. You don't ever find them. But I have something in me that they find me. And I don't know. I didn't know that till after that occurrence, but I would have never gotten over that. Martin Groves and I talked about this back then, back in the 90s. We'd go to lunch. I'd meet him for lunch, and he was with the sheriff's department, and I was going to a meeting or somewhere up in the county, and we would just talk about our experience. We had nobody else to talk to, and it's pretty crazy. And it's still today, it's still a fear in me from that. and I don't know why I still have it. But if I hadn't had my second encounter, I don't think I would have ever gotten over it. I'm good with it now. I don't have nightmares about it anymore. I did for a long time. I think the worst thing about it is you're on your own back in that day. You can't tell anybody. You just have to live with it. And I even told my wife at that time, and she goes, "Really, you seen that?" And I said, she goes, "I believe you. I know you're honest, but you seen that?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You probably seen a bear." I said, "No, wasn't a bear." And I just left it at that. Since I've older, she knows all about the story. And my granddad was chalant about it, like it wasn't a big deal. That was probably the shockingest thing that happened, because he never told me about him. But I understand why he didn't. But he's been gone quite a while right now. But my second encounter was by accident. I wasn't out looking for Bigfoot. I wasn't even hunting. And if I hadn't had that encounter, I probably would have never gotten over it. That was what changed everything for me. And I've had so many encounters since then. Some people say, "How do you see them and we don't?" I don't know how I see them. I really don't.
Yeah. Have all your Bigfoot encounters happened in Tennessee, Daryl?
Most of them. I had one in Virginia, and I had two in Virginia. My 9-year-old daughter and I, and she's really into it. My 9-year-old is. She really talks about Bigfoot all the time because she knows how much I'm into it.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
You wouldn't believe all the gifts I get every year. This room here is covered with Bigfoot statues and everything else.
Oh, I'm sure.
And she even got me but me and her, it was incredible. It was about 2 months ago. We were coming through a rural area. I was taking her home to her mother's house, and it's a real rural area outside of Smithville, Virginia. And we're driving down this road, and I'm taking her home, and it's near dark, and it's summertime then. It was hot outside. It didn't get dark till 8:30 or 8:45 at night. And I'm driving down this rural area road, a 2-lane highway, and it's actually a 4-lane, but they're split up, and it's real rural. And there's a car in front of me, and I'm watching this car, keeps braking, and my daughter says, "Dad, there's a man chasing a deer." And I look to the right, and this Bigfoot is chasing a deer over toward the woods down the side of the road here. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And it wasn't a big one. It was a juvenile. It might have been 6 or 7 foot tall, but it was real thin. It was chasing this deer. I said, "No, that's not a deer. That's a Bigfoot." And she looked at me, "Really?" And then it turned. We only seen it for a second, because when it seen the lady in front of me was with her daughter, and they had seen it too. And they pulled over to the side of the road, and I pulled over too and stopped. My daughter, I handed her my cell phone, and she started filming, and she didn't get the picture of the Bigfoot, but she got the deer. This deer was running as fast as it could run, and this thing was chasing it. My daughter thought it was a man chasing a deer, and I said, "No, that's a Bigfoot." And it quickly turned, and we got his backside as it went these real thick brush area. When it seen the cars and realized we'd seen it, it ran into the woods where we couldn't see it. And I stopped, and this lady in front of me stopped. And I got out of the car and got out of my SUV, and my daughter's sitting there, and she goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to talk to this lady a second." And the lady gets out of her car, and she has a little girl with her, and she goes, "What was that?" And I said, "It looked like a Bigfoot." And she goes, "What?" That's the way she acted. She goes, "I've seen it." She goes, "I don't know what it was, but nothing like I'd seen." And when I told her it was a Bigfoot, she jumped back in the car and locked her doors, and her little girl just took off. They were getting out of there. But me and her pulled up, and we pulled into where we seen it running into the brush, and it was almost dark at that time. You could barely see light. And I walked down into the woods trying to get a picture of it. I took my camera. I said, "You stay in the car," and I locked the doors. I said, "If you see it or get scared, you blow the horn." And she goes, "Don't go down in there." And I said, "I'll be okay." So I walked down. There was like a little trail, a logging road or something that went down in there, and I followed it around. probably about 100 yards back in there. And I took a bunch of pictures in that area. I heard it walking. I could hear it walking in there, but I couldn't see it. And I just started taking pictures in the woods and I actually got a silhouette of it. Matter of fact, Jennifer Appleton in my group, her and a couple other ladies found it in the picture, the silhouette of it standing next to a tree. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a full grown one. It was a juvenile. But that was so exciting for me, for my daughter to actually see one for just a second. And since she's seen that, all she talks about is, when can I go Bigfooting with you? When can I go in the woods? And I said, I want to take you out there at 9 years old. She goes, well, I'll go out there if you will. And she knows how crazy I am. I got some hope to come back, but I wouldn't want to take her out there.
Daryl, you've seen a dogman as well, correct?
My first dogman I seen was actually in October of 21 in Caswell County, Virginia. And that was just a crazy, I go to, where I live at it's mainly a farming area. There's lots of cotton and peanut farmers here. And I live about an hour and 15 minutes from where my children live. And I go to this little store in the morning, and it's like a country store, and I'll go in there. There's a bunch of older guys in there I see, and I'll sit and drink some coffee with them in the morning. And I was sitting there one morning, and this guy comes in. The guy that owns the store is an Indian guy, and it's hard to understand him all the time. And I'm sure it's hard for him to understand me with my country accent, but he knows me, and he's real friendly, real nice guy. And I'm sitting there at this table. It's a long wood table. There's usually 5 or 6 old farmers sitting there just talking about whatever. And we drink coffee in there. And I'm sitting there one morning and we're all talking. And they know I talk about Bigfoot. And some of them have seen them. They believe in them. A couple of them don't believe in them. It's not an argument, just conversation. We don't talk about it all the time. But this man and his son comes in and they walk up to the counter and they had gotten gas out front. And he asked the guy who owns the store, the Indian guy, he goes, do you know anybody around here that knows anything about creatures? And of course, I'm only 10 foot from the counter. When I heard creatures, I turned around thinking, what is he talking about? And this guy don't understand what he's asking him. He said, he said, we got a creature on our farm. And I looked up again and I got up and I walked up to him, and the gentleman who owns the store there, real nice guy, I started talking to the guy. I said, what kind of creature are you talking about? And he said, we live about 2 hours from here and maybe a little more. And we got something on our farm that's killed our goats and we don't know what it is. And we called the game and fish and the sheriff's department, they came out here and told us that it was probably some coyotes or something that killed them. He said, but this ain't no coyote. And I said, have you seen the creature? And he said, no, but I've heard it. And he told me some sounds that it made. And I said, I don't know. I said, I don't believe it's a coyote. And he said, you know anything about these things? I said, I don't know what kind of creature you have. I said, I know a little bit about some creatures. I said, I would probably know if I'd seen a track what it was. And he said, do you mind coming out to our house and looking around the barn there? He had a little shed that they kept their goats in. And I said, well, yeah, where do you live? And he said, for 2 hours from here. And he said, if you want to, you can follow me on out there. And I said, okay. And I got a call on the way out there, so I pulled him over and I said, give me your address and I'll come out the next day. My kids had called and I had to go get them. And so the next day I had his phone number, his cell number, and his address. And I had no idea where Caswell, Virginia was. It was actually about 3.5 hours away. But so I went out there the next day and I couldn't find it. I lost my reception with my GPS, and I called the guy up. I went back a ways where I got reception. And I said, "Can you meet me somewhere and show me how to get to where you're at?" And he said, "Sure, I'll meet you at this old store." I think it was Highway 68, I believe it was. I don't remember the exact. So I went, what I thought about, I found an old store that was closed, and I sat there for a few minutes, and he pulled up, and same vehicle he's in before, and he rolled the window down and said, "Just follow me." And I followed him a good ways back down the road, and we went off, and they were living really in the rural country, and you had to go down off the main road through a creek. You drove through a creek. It wasn't very deep, and then you went up over the creek, and he turned left and went back to the farmhouse they lived in. And he said, "I live here with my, excuse me, with my great aunt. I live here with my great aunt, me and my wife, and I believe he had a daughter too and a son, but they were little. They were 7 or 8 years old." And he said, "I'll show you where the goat house is." He called it the goat house. It was like a little shed. And I parked my vehicle and went back through the gate there with him and walked up next to the goat house. And I said, "Where's the goats?" He said, "This creature has killed them all." And I said, "Where are they?" And he said, "I've already drug them off." And I never seen the ghosts, but he said they were torn up pretty good. But I got to looking around the goat house, and it was real muddy around one side there. And I knew exactly what it was as soon as I seen the track. I knew it wasn't a Bigfoot. It was a Dogman track, and canine type track, and it was way too long to be a coyote or a wolf. And I said, "How long has this been going on?" He said, "All last year." He said, "First it started yelling at night, and the goats would go crazy, and the dogs would. And then one morning we came out, and one of the goats was dead, and we moved the other two, and then it come back and killed those." And I said, "Well, where do you think it's coming in at?" And he pointed up to a field house, and it was a huge field that was fenced in, barbed wire fenced in, where the goats had roamed up there. And he said, "It's coming in from up there somewhere. I don't know exactly where." He said, "But if you go around that field, there's a gate that goes through to the top of a hill, and you can park up on that hill and overlook that field, and you can probably see what's coming in there." And I said, "Okay." I said, "You want me to come up here and do this?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd like for you to, because I'm scared for my family. I don't know what it is." And I said, "Okay." So I spent a lot of time over there. I was over there probably 2.5 weeks, early in the morning a couple times, and then I'd stay till dark in the evening. I'd park my truck up on the top of that little hill there where I could see the field. I didn't see anything. And I was getting to the point where I'd just about given up on it, thinking whatever it was gone because the goats were. And like I said, I was about giving up, and I was sitting on that hill, and I was just looking across that field. It was probably 300-400 yards wide, and it was a huge field. And he said, and he had told me he thought it was coming in up in the very back part of it because there was woods behind that. And I was sitting there one evening, and it was light enough to see, but it was getting later in the evening. And this was in the fall, so it was like close to 6 o'clock. And I seen something in the corner of the field up there. It caught my eye, and I had a pair of binoculars that I had with me. And I looked through the binoculars, and it was dark, but I could see the figure moving, but I couldn't tell what it was. And then I seen it come across the fence, and it was running across and it's a long, wide field. I could see it running across the field, but there was sage grass in the field in spots, and I would lose it when it went into the sage grass, and then it would come out again and go into some more sage grass. But this thing ran so strange. It didn't run like a dog or something. It galloped like a horse, and it ran all the way across the field, then it slowed down. And right up above where my truck was at was the fence line down below me that ran up, met the corner of the other fence, and there was woods to the right of it. And I seen it run all the way to that fence. It stopped. It stood up on 2 legs. That's when I really went, wow. And I seen it really well. I couldn't see its feet, but I could see the bend in its legs as it stood up. And then it just stepped over the fence. It looked right at me, not right at me, but right in my direction. It didn't see me, but it looked in my direction. And then it stepped over the fence and went into the woods. And that was the first dogman I'd ever seen. And it looked like a German Shepherd in the face. It was solid black, looked almost identical to a German Shepherd head, except it was a walking big dog. And this wasn't 8 foot tall. It was probably 6 foot tall. I actually went down there. I went back the next day and spent the whole day there. I carried my gun and I went back in there, tried to track it. And I went right where it crossed the fence, and basing where it was standing next to a white spot on a tree was about 6'2" from the ground to there. And that could have varied a little bit because there was a slope there. But I crossed the fence and walked on down in there, and it went around to a bluff. There was a bluff back in there, side of a small mountain, and there was tracks. I could see tracks, and the ground was real moist in there. And I couldn't see tracks like I could next to the goat house, but I could see where something had been going back in there regularly. And a lot of bones back there, looked like deer bones and other type bones. And then I followed it on around the side of this bluff, and it was, I got a little eerie back there by myself because I don't know how many of these things were back there. But I found a bluff, and it was a little indention up under this bluff where something had dug out. You could see tracks going up under it, like there was a cave or something up under there. And I didn't go any further than that because I didn't want to take a chance of this thing attacking me.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
So I just mainly looked around there and seen a lot of evidence that's where it was going. So I came back out, and it was getting close to dark, and went on back home. And then the following weekend, I got all my gear, and I was going to go back in there and stay the whole day and try to film it. And I was coming across the creek, going into his place, and coming out of his property was a game warden, a Virginia Wildlife Resources Agency guy. And he met me at the creek as I'm coming in. He's coming out, and he rolls his window down and sticks his hand out, and I roll my window down. He said, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "This gentleman over here told me I could come up here and scout out." And he said, "What are you scouting for?" And I said, "Just looking around for different game." I didn't want to tell him what I was looking for. He probably thought I didn't know what he would have thought. But anyway, he said, "You got license here?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got Virginia license." And he said, "What do you got weapons?" And I told him I did. And he said, "There was not any deer in season." I said, "I'm not looking to kill anything. I'm just looking around." And he was real questionable. And he said, "Do you have permission to be here?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I told you I did." And he said, "You got a note or a letter stating that?" And I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Let's go up to these people's house then." And I followed him up there in his truck, and they came out, the guy did. And he said, "Yeah, I've gave him permission to be here. He's been coming here for a little over a month." And I told him he could go up on the hill there and just sit and watch for, he said, game. And he was good with that. He realized that I'd told him the truth. So he got in his truck, and I was going to go park and go back in there. And he stopped me and he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "I don't know what you're doing back here, but we've had a lot of farmers in the area complaining about their livestock being killed by some type of animal." He said, "I'd suggest you not go back in there." And I said, "What kind of animal is it?" And he wouldn't tell me. He wouldn't say. And he said, "I'd just suggest you not go back in there." And he was trying to tell me I needed to leave. And I went up there several times after that, probably 6 or 7 more times, and I never seen it again. So I don't know if they killed it or it moved on or what happened to it. So that actual homeowner, and I think his aunt has passed away since, and they may have moved. I don't know. He was talking about moving because he didn't feel safe with his children being there. And he hadn't heard of it or seen of it since. It may have killed out his livestock and moved on somewhere else, or maybe the game officials took it out. I don't know. But that was the first one I'd ever seen. And it was nothing like the second one that I seen with Martin Groves. It was more of a flesh and blood creature, this was. It wasn't anything that was cartoonish looking or anything. So
it's wild, Daryl. Oh man, you've got the wildest. You've had the wildest encounters happen to you. It's just in stuff I didn't know about the Virginia stuff, man. That's crazy, man. It's been going off of or thinking of the times you've seen Dogman versus the times you've seen Bigfoot. Which one do you think was more of a terrifying experience to you, would you say?
I don't think anything will ever top my first encounter with Bigfoot. What Martin Groves and I seen was pretty terrifying, but not like my first encounter. I think anytime you realize there's something like that, especially thinking no way possible there's a Bigfoot in this area, I wasn't even sure they existed when I had my first encounter because I'd never seen one, but I believe they probably did. I've always been open-minded and heard stories from people and took it as a credible story because I don't know what they've seen. Maybe they didn't. I'm still that way. I'm at the point in my life now, I've had so many encounters since then that if somebody called and told me there was a pterodactyl flying around New York City, I would probably say, what street is it on? I would probably believe it. I don't know what all's out there. I know there's a lot of things I haven't seen because I've got close friends that's seen stuff I haven't seen. I've got a friend that's seen a pterodactyl flying over Kentucky. I've heard a lot of stories, and I don't think these people are just making this up. Why would you make something like that? So it's pretty, I think the thing that bothers me so much is how critical some people can be toward other people's terror.
Yes.
These people scared to death what they think, and somebody wants to laugh about it and make a joke about it. And they really have to live that to understand it. I'm a true believer. It's a saying I've been saying for 30 years. You don't find any of these creatures, they find you. And that's a true story. Just don't go out in the woods banging on trees and shining lights and doing whoops and yells and have a Bigfoot come and visit you. You have to live in their environment and respect them. And I have Indian in me, and my grandmother was Indian and American Indian. And she told me a lot of tales about things that exist, and I'm sure they probably do. I've never seen some of them, but encounters for me, I wonder myself for so many years why I see all these things. And I do know some other people that have things like I have, and they see them. But I know other people don't see anything, and they go in the woods all their life. So it really is hard to understand how some people do and some people don't. So I've learned a lot from friends, and especially the Native Americans. They believe that these creatures feel the person inside their spirit. And I believe that because I feel like I have a good heart, and I'm honest and easygoing. And I think the creatures, I know the Bigfoot, there's no doubt, they can read what you're thinking and they know what your intentions are. You go running around the woods with a gun and a camera, and your chances of seeing one are pretty slim because these creatures know what a gun is. And I'm sure that they probably have stories themselves or their family or members of their family being shot by human beings or shot at or killed possibly. I do think they're bad Bigfoot. I've had bad experiences, and I think they're like people. There's good and bad and everything, and I've been very fortunate that I've run into more good ones than bad ones, but I've been pretty scared a few times with these things. But the two guys I go in with all the time, and then three guys, including Ron Moorhead, those guys aren't scared of anything. Martin Groves will go in the middle of the night, and Martin Nunley will do it, and Ron is not fearful either. You don't want to go into the woods being fearful. If you have fear I know for a fact Bigfoot will play off of it because they want to scare you. They'll throw sticks and rocks at you. They'll growl. They'll bluff charge you. They'll do things to not harm you, to get you out of their area. They don't want you in there. It takes a long time to gain trust from these creatures, and a lot of work and a lot of hours to gain trust. And I know that from my experiences with some of them and a family of one of them. I've had some terrible encounters. It's amazing all the stuff I've had. I don't even know how it happens, but it does.
It feels like you should, Daryl, you should really have your own book. Have you considered just, I'm going to put it all down in a book?
Martin Groves and I've talked about that 1,000 times. Martin Unley and I've talked about it. I even told Ron, every time I start writing a book, I'm one of those type of people that is a perfectionist. I feel like I've left something out, or I feel like I didn't put everything in there, and I'll tear it up and start over.
Oh man.
It takes me, I have started on one, but it's a slow process for me. And I could never write down all my encounters and things I've seen in one book. So it would be a thick book. So I would probably have to write a couple of books. But the main thing is finding the time to do it, because, I'm here weeks or 2 or 3 weeks out of the month. And then I go home for 10 or 14 days to be with my mom and dad and my farm and Martin and Barton, and hang out with them and go with them for some time and visit my oldest daughter, my grandson. So time frame, and plus trying to work on top of all that.
Oh, sure.
It seemed like there's not enough hours in the day to get that accomplished, but I do plan on doing one eventually.
I would jump in there with the other guys and say, hey, it might be a good idea to try to get that all down for future people to learn from. But Daryl, this has been just a really fun chat, and I feel like I could talk with you for hours and hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. And do you mind sharing what are some ways, if there's any ways that people can keep up to date with what you're doing or contact you or anything like that?
I pretty much just, most of the events that I really just, besides the podcast that I'm honored to be on, I get asked often, but besides telling my stories on these, you got a great show, and I appreciate you being in my group. But I also usually post what we've seen or something. A lot of times I don't get into detail on some things we see, but I put it in the group regularly. Me or Martin and Barton do, and Ron was with us this last trip. I put a bunch of stuff in there when we were there. We were there last week. Martin and I stayed there 4 days, and they were up there with us for three nights. But I would probably just Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures is the name of my group. And we have a really good bunch of people there. We don't allow any criticism. And I know a lot of people say, well, that's not a good group then, but we just don't allow it. If you're going to come in there and bash somebody, you won't be there very long. I would appreciate anybody that wants to join. We have a great admin. You have Carter Bouchard. I got so many admins. Ron Moorhead is admin. Martin Groves, Barton Unley, Renda K. Puckett, my close friend Jennifer Appleton, Robin Haynes, Rebecca Kurt, Snuffy Dyer. We have a Kenny Busby. Oh my gosh, they have a credible story. That Bigfoot that they're friends with for quite a few years. I go out and sit with them, but
I got to talk to them.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have a lot of people. All my admin have had a lot of experience, and most of them I've known a long time. Some of them, like Martin Groves, not as long as them, but close. But we try to treat everybody good, and we learn a lot in our group. We have a lot of people that have joined that don't know anything about it, but they're open-minded. And I just want to thank you for letting me come on, and I'm honored to be here. And I appreciate you posting in our group all the time. And big fan.
Yeah.
We're a fan of yours, me and Martin both. He told me tonight, he said, that guy's a good guy. I didn't tell anybody in the group I was going to be on. I was short on time. But I appreciate you having me on, and you come down to Elb sometime. We'll let you walk around.
Man, I'm meaning it's on the list to go down there. I would love to take you up on that. And listeners, if you want to read more about what Daryl has experienced over the years, you can get The Bigfoot Phenomenon by Josh Turner. And then it's also in Martin Grove's second book as well. And in the future, it'll be in Daryl's book too, when he gets that out.
Yeah, one of these days I'll get it. Anyway, there's so many good books to read as I've got them behind. Barton Nunley's, Martin Grove's, Josh Turner's. There's a lot of good books out there that people can read, but encounters are something that I live through. And that's why I guess I'm a little more skeptical and make sure I've got everything right in there. And eventually I'll get it. But anyway, I just want to thank you for having me on and appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Daryl. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.